The courthouse steps were still warm from the afternoon sun when Marla Cassidy signed her name in dust-smudged ink, her hand trembling not from fear, but from the hollow ache of having nothing left to lose. The auctioneer barely looked at her as he slid the deed across the splintered table. $23. That's what the old Pharaoh place had gone for. "You know what they say about that house," the auctioneer muttered, his eyes finally meeting hers with something between pity and warning. Marla took the deed and tucked it into her torn pocket. "I know what they say about me, too. Ain't stopped me from breathing yet." Marla Cassidy was a name spoken in whispers now, the woman whose husband had vanished 2 winters past, leaving nothing but debts and rumors. Some said she'd poisoned him. Others said she'd driven him to another woman's bed. The preacher's wife claimed she'd seen Marla gathering herbs by moonlight, muttering words no Christian woman ought to know. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter when a woman stood alone. She walked down those courthouse steps with her daughters. Little Beth, 7 years old, clutched her mother's skirt. Sarah, 10, and already learning the weight of judgment, walked behind with their only possession, a cast-iron pot wrapped in flour sack. The Pharaoh place sat 5 miles west, where the prairie broke into rocky hills. Nobody had lived there in 15 years, not since Eliza Pharaoh had been found hanging from the barn rafter. Witch, they'd called her. Adulteress. Deceiver. A woman dead and a house left to rot. They walked the 5 miles in silence, the setting sun turning the sky purple and gold and angry red. The house appeared as a dark shape against the darkening sky, its windows empty as skull sockets, its porch sagging like a broken jaw. "Mama, it's haunted," Beth whispered. "Ain't no such thing as ghosts, baby girl. Just memories that don't know they're dead yet." The door hung crooked, and when Marla pushed it open, the smell of rot and 15 years of abandonment rolled out. Inside, nothing remained but stains on floorboards and a stone fireplace black with old soot. They huddled that first night around a fire Marla built from fence posts. The splinters drawing blood, she wiped on her dress without comment. Beth cried herself to sleep. Sarah stared into flames with eyes too old for her face, and Marla sat awake, listening to the house settle, creaking boards, scratching in walls, wind through cracks they'd need to seal before winter. The sun rose cruel and bright, showing the full decay. But there was a root cellar, and there was the attic. Marla found the attic stairs on the second day, behind a door she'd thought was a closet. The steps climbed into darkness the morning light couldn't reach. "Don't go up there, Mama," Sarah said. "It feels wrong." But Marla climbed anyway. At the top, a solid oak door, locked. She returned with tools and pried the hinges free. The attic was small. Single window let in dusty light, and in that light she saw them. 3 leather trunks, arranged in a careful row. Inside the first, beautiful dresses, preserved despite years. Jewelry, real gold, real silver. The second, books, journals filled with careful handwriting. The third was locked, but the key hung beside it on a nail. Inside, wrapped in blue silk, a small wooden box. She opened it. A piece of rope, old, frayed, dark-stained. And beneath it, a page of writing. The words were faded but legible, written in ink that had turned the color of dried blood. They called me witch because I could read. Called me adulteress because I refused a man who thought my late husband's land should pass to him. through my body, called me deceiver, because I would not bow. They came with rope and judgment, and I chose the rope on my own terms rather than theirs. But I leave this record. I leave this proof. I was Eliza Farrow, and I was not what they claimed. Let whoever finds this know, survival is the only testimony that matters. Below the words, a date, September 14th, 1867. Marla's hands trembled as she read it twice, then 3 times. Around her, the attic seemed to hold its breath. From below, Beth's laughter rose up through the old house. Some game Sarah had invented to distract her from hunger. She looked at the rope, at the stained fibers that had held a woman's final weight. Then she studied the other documents in the trunk. Deeds to this property, but also to land beyond it, 160 acres, legally registered, never transferred. Water rights, mining claims, bank certificates, a life's worth of acquisitions, all recorded, all preserved, all waiting. Eliza Farrow had been a woman of means, a woman of education, and they destroyed her with whispers. Marla descended the stairs with the papers clutched to her chest, leaving the rope behind. Some things needed to stay buried a while longer. "Mama?" Sarah looked up from her game with Beth. "What did you find?" "A ghost who wasn't ready to disappear." Marla spread the documents on the floor. "And maybe our future." That night, after the girls slept, Marla sat by the fire and read through everything. The deeds were legal. The land was real. But claiming it would mean going back to that courthouse, standing before those same men who'd watched her buy this house with pity in their eyes. It would mean fighting. The next morning, she wrapped the most important documents in oilcloth and hid them in the root cellar. Then she took Beth and Sarah into town for supplies, using the last of their money for cornmeal and salt pork. The general store went quiet when they entered. Mrs. Patterson, the merchant's wife, clutched her shawl tighter. 2 men by the stove stopped their conversation mid-sentence. "We need flour," Marla said, her voice steady, "and lamp oil if you got it." The merchant, a thick-necked man named Horace, didn't move. "That's the Farrow place you bought." "It is." "You know what happened there?" "I know what people say happened there. I also know a roof from a hole in the ground, and right now that house is the only thing standing between my daughters and the winter wind." Mrs. Patterson made a small sound of disapproval. "It ain't Christian. Living in a suicide's house ain't natural." Marla turned to look at her, and something in her gaze made the older woman step back. What ain't natural is a woman being driven to death by lies. What ain't Christian is letting it happen, then spitting on her grave after. The store went silent as a church. Even the stove seemed to stop crackling. Horace cleared his throat. "I'll get you your flour." As he measured it out, a child's voice piped up from the corner. A small boy Marla hadn't noticed, maybe 5 years old, sitting on a barrel. "My grandma knew Miss Eliza. Said she was kind. Said she gave Grandma medicine when she was sick." His mother rushed to hush him, but the words hung in the air like smoke. Marla paid for her supplies and left, but she felt eyes on her back all the way down the street. Some were hostile, but some, just a few, were curious. That night she climbed back to the attic and stood before the rope. He came on the 4th day, riding a gray horse that had seen better years, leading a pack mule loaded with fence wire and timber. Marla was in the yard, trying to dig a new privy hole with a shovel she'd found in the barn, when she heard the hoofbeats. She straightened. pushing hair from her face, leaving a streak of dirt across her cheek. The man who rode up was maybe 40, with a face weathered by sun and something deeper, grief, maybe, or regret. He wore a cavalry hat faded nearly white, and his boots were held together with the same kind of wire that bound Marla's. "Mrs. Cassidy?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "That's right." He dismounted slow, favoring his left leg. "Name's Coleman, James Coleman. I knew your husband." Marla's grip tightened on the shovel. "Then you knew him better than I did by the end." "Fair enough." He glanced at the house, then back at her. "I owed him money. Never got the chance to pay it back before he left. Figured I'd work it off here, if you'll have me. Heard you bought this place. It needs considerable fixing." "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask for pay. Asked to work off a debt." Marla studied him. His eyes were gray as his horse, and steady. He didn't look away from her gaze the way most men in town did, like she was something shameful they didn't want to acknowledge. "My husband never mentioned you. We served together in the war. After, we went different ways. I saw him in Denver, 3 winters back. He lent me $50 when I was in a bad spot. Said he'd come collect when he needed it, but he never did." Something in his voice told her he was lying, but not about the important parts. Whatever debt James Coleman carried, it wasn't about money. "There's no bunkhouse," she said finally. "Barn's got a loft. I've slept worse places." She nodded once. "There's coffee on the stove. Cold, but it's coffee." He worked for 3 days without much talking, repairing the fence, patching the roof, fixing the pumps so clean water finally ran. Sarah watched him with suspicious eyes. Beth brought him wildflowers she'd found by the creek, and Marla kept her distance, grateful but wary. On the evening of the 3rd day, he knocked on the door instead of just heading to the barn. When she opened it, he held his hat in his hands. "There's talk in town," he said quietly, "about you claiming Eliza Farrow's land, about you having papers." Marla's blood went cold. "Who's talking?" "Man named Garrett, Cyrus Garrett. Says his family's been using that land for grazing 15 years. Says it's rightfully theirs now by abandonment. It's not abandoned if it's owned." "I know that, but Garrett's got 3 sons and a mean streak. He's the one who—" Coleman stopped, shifted his weight. "He's the one who was courting Eliza Farrow when her husband died. The one she refused." Understanding hit Marla like cold water. "He's the reason she's dead. Can't prove it. But everyone knows he wanted that land. When she wouldn't marry him, the rumors started. Within 6 months, she was hanging from a rafter, and nobody stopped it. Nobody ever does." Coleman met her eyes. "I stopped too many things too late in my life, Mrs. Cassidy. I won't stop this one." Behind her, Sarah's voice came soft. "Mama, who is it?" Marla didn't turn around. "A friend, baby. Go back to Beth." Coleman nodded once and headed toward the barn. But Marla saw him pause by the well, looking back at the house like he was measuring what he'd have to defend. That night, she took the rope from the attic and brought it down to the kitchen. They came on Sunday, 6 of them on horseback, while Coleman was in town getting nails. Marla was teaching Beth her letters on the porch when she heard the thunder of hooves. Sarah, hanging laundry by the side of the house, dropped the wet sheet and ran. "Mama!" Marla stood slowly, placing herself between her daughters and the riders. The man in front was broad-shouldered, with a face like sun-cracked leather and eyes the color of dirty ice. Cyrus Garrett. She knew him without introduction. Mrs. Cassidy. He didn't dismount. We need to have a conversation about property rights. Then you can have it with the land office. I got deeds, legal ones. Deeds from a dead woman ain't worth the paper they're written on. That land's been open range for 15 years. Open range don't mean owned. It means nobody had the spine to challenge a murderer for it. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Behind Garrett, his sons shifted in their saddles. One of them, barely 20 with mean little eyes, spat tobacco juice into her yard. Careful with your accusations, woman. Why? You gonna hang me too? Write witch on a sign and pin it to my chest? Marla's voice was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. I found her testimony. I found everything. And I got it recorded in 3 places. So if something happens to me, the territorial marshal gets a copy. It was a lie. She hadn't recorded anything yet, but Garrett didn't know that. His horse pranced sideways, feeling its rider's anger. You're making a mistake. The only mistake was made 15 years ago, and it's got a name. For a moment, she thought he might ride her down right there. His hand moved toward the rifle on his saddle. Behind her, she heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath. Then a child's voice cut through the tension. Mr. Garrett? It was Beth, stepping around her mother's skirts despite Marla's grab for her. Why are you being mean to my mama? The question was so simple, so clear, that it seemed to catch him off guard. He looked down at the small girl with her earnest face and tangled hair. This is grown folks' business, child. My mama ain't done nothing wrong. She just wants a house. Why can't she have a house? One of Garrett's men coughed. Another looked away. And in that moment of hesitation, Marla heard another horse, Coleman, returning at a gallop, his rifle across his saddle. He pulled up beside the porch, and though he didn't aim the weapon, everyone could see it. Problem here. No problem, Garrett said finally. Just a misunderstanding. He looked at Marla. You think carefully about what you're claiming, Mrs. Cassidy. This land has a way of taking what it wants. They rode out, dust rising behind them like the wake of something poisonous. Coleman dismounted, his face grim. They'll be back. I know. Marla pulled Beth close, feeling the small body trembling now that the danger had passed. But not today. That night, after the girls were asleep, Marla took the rope outside. Coleman had built a fire pit for cooking, and the flames were still burning low. She stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of the frayed hemp in her hands. The last physical evidence of Eliza Farrow's shame, preserved like some kind of relic. This shouldn't exist, she said quietly. Coleman, sitting on a stump nearby, nodded. No, it shouldn't. She threw it into the fire. The old rope caught immediately, flames running along its length like it had been waiting 15 years to burn. The smoke rose black and thick, carrying with it the smell of old suffering finally released. The territorial marshal came 2 weeks later, a thin man with spectacles who spent 3 hours reviewing Marla's documents at the kitchen table. Coleman stood by the door, rifle propped against the wall within reach. The girls played outside, their laughter drifting through the open window. These deeds are legitimate, the marshal said finally. Eliza Farrow's property transfers to her legal heir, which, he consulted another paper, would be a sister back east who never claimed it. But there's a provision here. Says if no heir comes forward within 20 years, the property can be claimed by right of occupancy and improvement. 20 years was up 3 years ago, Marla said. That it was. He closed the folder. I'll file these proper. But Mrs. Cassidy, you should know. Cyrus Garrett's filed a counterclaim. Says he's got witnesses to abandonment and improvement. He's got lies. Maybe so. But it'll mean a hearing. Judge comes through in spring. The marshal stood, tucking the papers into his satchel. Until then, I'd suggest you keep improving this place. Make it clear you're not going anywhere. After he left, Marla walked out to where the old barn foundation still showed through the weeds. This was where Eliza had died, where they'd found her hanging, where they'd cut her down and buried her without ceremony in the hard ground. She knelt and began pulling stones from the earth. Creek rocks, foundation stones, pieces of the old barn. Her hands bled as she worked, but she didn't stop. Sarah joined her without asking why. Then Beth, and finally Coleman, his calloused hands moving the larger rocks that Marla couldn't lift. They worked until sunset, building a border of stones in a rectangle 6 feet by 3 feet. Then Marla went to the attic one last time and brought down one of Eliza's journals, the one with pressed flowers between its pages, with poetry copied in careful script, with the evidence of a woman's educated, gentle heart. She placed it in a tin box, sealed it, and buried it at the head of the stone rectangle. Then she planted wildflower seeds over it, the same kind Beth had been gathering, the ones that grew stubborn and bright in hard ground. "What are we making, Mama?" Beth asked. "A testimony," Marla said, "so nobody forgets." That night, sitting on the porch with Coleman while the girls slept inside, Marla finally asked the question she'd been holding. "You didn't know my husband, did you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "No, ma'am, but I knew Eliza Farrow. Was courting her myself, before Garrett started spreading his poison. I left town instead of fighting for her. Told myself it wasn't my business." He looked at his hands. Been carrying that cowardice ever since. When I heard another woman had moved into this place alone, I figured I could do right this time. You can't fix the past by living in it. No, but maybe I can keep it from happening again. The spring hearing came and went. The judge, seeing Marla's improvements, new fences, planted fields, the stone garden with its fresh flowers, and finding no legal basis for Garrett's claim, ruled in her favor. Cyrus Garrett rode past the property once after that, his face hard as winter ground, but he didn't stop. Years later, people would point to the Cassidy place, to the woman who'd turned a dead woman's shame into living ground, who'd burned the rope and planted flowers, who'd stood against men with nothing but documents and daughters and one guilt-haunted protector. And they'd tell the story, around campfires, the way all true stories are told, not as victory, but as survival, not as an ending, but as a beginning written in stone and seed. The stone garden still blooms every spring. Some testimonies are written in ink, others in blood and rope and fire. But the ones that matter most are written in the ground itself, in what we choose to plant, in what we refuse to let die. What will you plant in the hard ground of your own life? What rope needs burning? What stone garden waits to bloom?